The overall structure of Christmas stockings. Assemble the embroidery cloth into the embroidery hoop. The pattern should be centered. Vertical stamp first. Embroidery method for ray poking socks and bows. Then poke gifts, crutches, and leaves. Finally, the background part is drawn. Cut and sew the remaining embroidery cloth. So the Christmas stockings are made. Next, let's take a look at materials and tools. First of all, let's get to know the needle. It comes with a wire guide built into it. This lead is used to thread the lead wire. And each poke needle is only equipped with a leading device. Please keep it safe when not in use. It's made of a metal tube and a plastic casing. There are 4 ABCD gears on the plastic case. Press the tail to adjust the gear. The length of the needle tube corresponding to each gear is different. This is a file. A gear needle length is the longest. This is file B. This is file C. This is the D file. D gear has the shortest needle length when everyone is making, according to the material packaging requirements, or adjust the gear according to your actual needs. Now let's thread. Remove the lead. Pinch the tip of the fuse tight. Through the pinhole in front of the tip. Go through the needle. Thread the lead into until it passes through the end of the poke needle so the fuse is worn. Next, you can take out the yarn you need. And this is a demonstration. You can take some more thread off the ball of thread. Put it aside for backup. Avoid making. The card line is offline because there are too few lines. Find the thread. Run the thread through the lead. Pull a short distance. Then pull the extra lead on the front end of the tip. Pulling will out of the eye of a needle. Then remove the lead. You can take a look. It looks like this after wearing it. Excess thread in front of the tip. Take back about 3 to 5 centimeters. The length of the thread can be adjusted according to the gear used. So the threading is done. Became in the later production process. The method of threading is the same every time you change the thread. Remove the outer basket. If it's too tight to take it out, you can soak the rust stretch in hot water for 1 minute. It is easier to take out after waiting to soften. Be careful with hot water. Take out the embroidery cloth. The pattern above is printed. Embroidered cloth on the inner frame. Pattern centered. Put the outer frame on the embroidery cloth, the position that can be connected to the inner frame below. Note that the pattern should be in the middle of the box. It will be more beautiful to embroider this way. Pull adjustment after trapping. The 4 weeks of the embroidery cloth must be adjusted together, otherwise it is easy to deform. In this way, the embroidery stretch is assembled. Start poking the top half of the socks. Take out the white thread and thread it into the poke needle. Leave a length of 3 centimeters for the tail. The gear of the poke needle is in gear C. Be careful to keep the leads safe. Poke the needle in the right position of the blue wire pull. Pull the extra thread to the back. Lift the needle. Parallel upward puncture. The position is flushed with the first stitch. Then fold back and insert the needle next to the first needle. Every subsequent frame is punctured in parallel like this. If there is an offline situation, you can scrape the excess wool of the embroidery cloth with the tip of a needle. Pull back and continue to poke back into the hole. You can hold the coil with your hands on the back. Cover directly when you poke to the vertical line printed with blue stitches. You can trace it out with a washable pen later. Poke back and forth in this way. Be careful to keep the upper and lower sides relatively flat. Do not exceed the blue stitches. Take out the U-shaped scissors and remove the lid. Cut yarn along the bottom. Poke the thread back. Then poke to the bottom half of the sock. Poke the smaller areas first. These 2 pieces need to use yarn 15. Thread the wool into the needle. Two poking in one direction. The oblique opening of the poke needle is poked towards the place to be poked, perpendicular to the embroidery cloth. A needle to the end. Pull the thread to the back. The next needle is inserted at a distance of about 6 millimeters from the first needle. Poke it to the end and lift it up gently. Don't raise it too high. Next to the diagonal opening of the embroidery cloth, always moving in the direction to be stamped. Near the edge of the embroidery stretch, it can be poked tightly against the inner frame of the embroidery stretch. Rotate the embroidery cloth in one direction. Then poke to the second lap, each stitch in the second circle. Insert the needle in the middle of each stitch in the previous circle, and then create these crisscrossing textures. If you encounter such an offline situation, it's normal for beginners. At this time, you need to check whether the wool is pressed by hand. Did you take more wool out of the wool ball? Is there a small hole in the head of the wool that passes through the oblique opening? When poking the needle, is there a whole needle poking to the end? Gently scraping the embroidery cloth with the tip of a needle. Repair small holes in embroidery cloth. Pull back the extra thread. Then just poke down. It can be rotated to a direction that is convenient for poking. After the poking is completed, hold down the wool, cut yarn along the bottom, and poke the thread back to the back. Use the methods you learned earlier, and just stamp another region of this color. Then poke the texture with a white line. According to the color position on the diagram, first white texture. You can proceed along the green edge. Poke each needle at about 6 millimeters. Do not exceed the blue stitches. The second and third are radiants of white texture. The corners can reduce the needle moment. Poke the remaining sock areas. Thread the wool into the needle with a red thread. Use the method learned earlier to stamp. Stamping along the edges of other colors. Be careful not to cover other yarns. The top half of the sock needs to be poked around the edge with a red thread. Each needle is about 6 millimeters. Then stamp the gift part. Take out yarn 28 and insert it into the poke needle. Cross poke on the blue line of the square. Find a place to insert the needle first. Parallel poke to the middle position, and poke it to the other blue line. Turn back and poke back to the middle. Poke again next to the first stitch. Poke back and forth in this way. Be careful to keep the left and right sides and the middle relatively flat. Do not exceed the blue stitches. After the poking is completed, draw the anchor points of the 4 bands on the 4 sides. Take out the big red line and poke it horizontally first. No need to stamp in the middle. Just fold it back and poke it into one. Then poke vertically. Reserve 10 centimeters of wool first, then poke into the fixed point position. Poke down parallel to 1. Fold it backwards and poke it to the back. Leave another 10 centimeters long wool. Crop. These 2 will need to be tied into a bow. Fold the 2 yarns in half to the length that can be knotted. Cross your hands and pull out the yarn. After forming 2 coils, you can adjust the size of the bow according to your preference. Pull the following line segments to adjust. Finally, tighten the coil. About 2 centimeters in the line segment, cut off extra line segments. Then use the poke needle to poke the line segment to the back. So the gift is poked. The cane part is positioned according to the color on the diagram. The red part is finished first. Cross poke in the corresponding position. Be careful not to poke beyond the blue stitches. The coil can be arranged on the back after a small poke. Continue to stamp the red part. The poking method for the white part is the same. Then poke the leaf part. Yarn 15 into the needle. After inserting the needle at the center point, parallel pokes are made to the blue lines on the left and right sides. Then poke back to the center point in turn. Be careful not to poke other patterns, according to the blue line and width of the edge of the leaf. Stamping of different lengths. Finally, the tip part folds parallel to the center point. Poke to order. Wicker leaves required yarn 32. Thread the wool into the needle. The first needle is pierced at the bottom. Lift gently. Forked branches and leaves center point. After poking and lifting, first insert the needle into the blue thread on the right. Turn back and poke back to the center point. Go to the blue stitch on the left and enter the needle. Fold back and poke back to the center point. Continue the injection at the next central point. The left and right leaves are poked in the same way as before. After returning to the center point, insert the needle at a distance of about 6 millimeters. After the second needle is poked in, fold it and poke it twice. So the leaves are poked. This poke is the same as before. The stem of the Christmas fruit only needs to be poked. Start with the blue stitches on the right near the fruit. Lift the needle, poked in the middle of the bottom, and poke it into the blue stitch in the middle. After disconnection and cutting, re-insert the needle in the middle of the bottom. Lift the needle into the blue stitch on the left. The fruit needs yarn 37. Puncture at the edge of the circle and turn back once. The remaining 2 practices are the same. Then embroider the bow part. The vertical line position of the bow, one of them is covered by a white line. You can take out the washable pen. The corresponding position on the diagram is roughly drawn. Then take out the big red wire, measured with reference to the diameter of the embroidery stretch. Take a piece and pinch it with your fingers as a marker. Then fold in half at the mark. 9 pieces in total. Start threading. Remove the large hole needle. Find the big red thread. Tighten through the pinhole. The wool part is embroidered with single thread, so just pull a short distance. The threads on both sides are one long and one short. Then tie a knot at the end of this long piece of thread. Tension. Place the large needle on the back. Cut through the vertical line on the right, parallel to the vertical line on the left. Don't pull it too tight. U-shaped scissors can be used for the vacancy in the middle. Reference from the side. After tightening the extra thread, pull out the U-scissors. The second needle is pierced next to the first needle on the right. The hole is about 1 grit away. When you tighten the yarn at the back, you need to fix the front line segment with your left hand, then parallel through the blue stitches on the left. The front line is the same as the first line. The embroidery method of the back line segment is the same. Note that the left hand always fixes the front line segment. Prevent being tightened. Embroidered until all the vertical lines are covered. If you want the bell part to be fuller, you can repeat the embroidery again. The front segment pulls down. The large hole needle is pierced in the middle of the back. Bypass the front line segment. Penetration into needle position. Tighten and repeat. Tidy up the bows, then pierce through the center point. Wrap a line segment of about 5 cm. Penetrate the just started position. Line segments are cut with scissors. Tidy up the bows. Rotating sleeve cloth. Then poke the snowflakes. Thread the pineapple yellow thread into the large hole. Pierce in the center. One of the wires is tied and penetrated. Fold back to center point. Poke the cross until it's done. Broken line clipping. 2 blue stitches left. Just poke one. Pierce at the bottom of one of the blue stitches. Lift the needle. After poking to the center point, parallel to the top of the blue stitch. The other one is the same rubbing method. Stamping of ribbons. Stamping along the blue line. Each needle is about 5 millimeters. The dots are folded and poked backwards in sequence. The rubbing method of its small decoration is the same as in front. So the little decoration is done. Then poke into the background. Remove the white line. Thread the wool into the needle. Poke along the inner frame of the embroidery stretch. Find one of the dots and poke it in. Poke in one direction. Each needle is controlled at about 6 millimeters. The embroidery cloth can be rotated during the poking process. Easy to poke moles. When encountering other patterns that cannot be poked, can cut wool. The socks are close to the inner frame of the embroidery stretch. You can poke in this direction. Finish the back yarn after 1 lap. Adjust embroidery stretch. Second lap. Insert the needle in the middle of each stitch in the first lap. and they create these crisscrossing textures. Unable to poke can be stamped along the edges of the pattern. Be careful to disconnect in time. The background is stamped using the method previously learned. Note that only one needle of white wool needs to be poked in the ribbon. After all stamping is completed, you can check where there is a leaking needle. The needle can be replenished. Fill the screen. After the poking is completed, poke the pattern on the socks, according to the position and pattern size on the picture book. After approximate comparison, cover and stamp system, the first row is marked with a cross pattern. Poke in the center, poke up, and then fold back and poke back to the center point. The other three stamping methods are the same. Be careful to poke each needle back to the center point. Poke 3 crosses from big to small. The second one only needs 1 stitch. Reduce the pitch according to the actual position. Second row poke dot pattern. After the first needle is inserted into the needle, the distance is about 5 millimeters and then poked in. And the dot is done. The remaining two poking methods are the same. The third row of poked horizontal line patterns. The length of the horizontal line is about 6 millimeters. Just poke it to 1. So the pattern is stamped. Then turn the embroidery stretch to the back. Cut the thread to about the same length as the coil. After trimming, organize the embroidery cloth. The excess embroidery cloth should be cut about 2 centimeters away from the border. If you are not sure about the position, you can use washable pen to eliminate the stroke and then cut it. After cutting, take out the fine cotton rope. Length of thread along the diameter of the embroidery cloth. Take a piece and pinch it with your finger as a mark. Then fold in half at the mark. Fold 3 sections in total and cut them. Start threading. Remove the large hole needle. Find the thread and tighten it through the pinhole. The threads on both sides are 1 long and 1 short. Then tie a knot at the end of this long piece of thread. You can tie to knots. Prevent offline tensioning. And the threading is done. Fold the embroidery cloth in half. Align flush with the inner frame. The large hole needle penetrates the folded edges of the embroidery cloth. Pull it out and then penetrate it at a position of about 1 centimeter. Embroidered in this way. The process of embroidery. Adjust the embroidery position against the wool from time to time. Be careful to sew against the edge of the embroidery stretch. The last needle penetrates in front of the first needle. Pull out and remove the large hole needle. Pull the knot out and tighten it. To bend the embroidery cloth, tighten the 2 line segments together. Adjust the tightness of the embroidery cloth. After tightening, tie the 2 line segments twice. Cut off extra line segments. In this way, the Christmas carols and Christmas stockings are made.